Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, I invite you to set aside the noise of the day, to rest your thoughts upon the soft rhythm of waves and the gentle hum of wind. Allow your eyes to close, your breath to slow, and your heart to quiet. We are going on a journey together to a place by the sea where time moves differently, where the nights are long and peaceful, and where a solitary light burns against the darkness. This is the story of the Lighthouse Keeper. The sea is alive. It does not sleep, though it sometimes whispers as if it dreams. On some nights, it roars with fury, waves crashing against black rocks with such force that the earth itself seems to tremble. On other nights, it lies still and glassy, reflecting stars as though the heavens have spilled across its surface. Yet whatever the mood of the sea, there is one thing that never changes the lighthouse. It stands tall on the edge of a cliff. White stone smoothed by wind and salt, its tower reaching into the sky like a steadfast sentinel. At its crown burns a great lamp, steady and golden, shining across the restless waters. To sailors, it is a beacon of hope, the difference between safety and ruin. To villagers inland, it is a comfort, proof that even when storms rage and skies darken, the light will not falter. And to the man who tends it, it is his life's work, his constant companion, perhaps even his only true friend. His name is Elias. He has been the lighthouse keeper for as long as the villagers remember. Some say he was born to the sea. Others whisper that he arrived one morning from a distant shore and simply never left. What all agree upon is his devotion. Elias tends the flame with a care so deep it borders on reverence. At dusk, he climbs the spiral staircase within the tower, his lantern swinging in his hand, and he prepares the great lamp for the long night ahead. He trims the wick, polishes the glass, and breathes life into the flame until it glows so brightly that it seems to set the horizon alight. And when the golden beam stretches across the waters, Elias always pauses a moment to watch it, his face lit by its glow, his heart calmed by its promise. The rhythm of his days is steady, as certain as the tides. At dawn, when the sun lifts its pale head from the horizon, Elias extinguishes the lamp. He descends the winding stairs, the sound of his boots echoing against the stone, and enters his small cottage that clings to the side of the tower like a shell to a rock. The cottage is modest, one room for cooking and resting, one for writing, and shelves lined with journals that chart the history of storms and calms, of passing ships and rare visitors. Each morning, Elias sits at his desk by the window, his pen moving across the page, recording the language of wind and wave. Where others might see nothing but endless water, Elias sees a book that writes itself anew each day. Sometimes, when the weather is kind and the sea gentle, Elias leaves the lighthouse and walks the path down the cliffs to the village below. The path winds through fields of tall grass and wildflowers that bend in the breeze. Along the way, he often pauses to watch the gulls wheel overhead or to pick a sprig of heather, its purple blossoms vivid against the green. The village welcomes him warmly, though he is not often there. Children greet him with curious smiles, calling him the man of the light, and elders nod in quiet respect. The villagers rely on the lighthouse more than they sometimes admit. Fishermen return home safe because of it, and traders find harbor in stormy weather. Elias speaks little of himself when he visits, preferring to share the news of the sea, the change in currents, the approach of a storm, the rare sighting of dolphins dancing near the coast. The villagers gift him bread, fruit, wool, and sometimes a bottle of honey mead to keep him warm through winter nights. He accepts with quiet gratitude and returns to his solitude. But Elias does not mind solitude. The sea is company enough, its moods a constant presence, its song a lullaby that never ceases. The lighthouse, too, is alive in its own way, creak of its stones in the wind, the hum of its lamp, the spiral stair that groans beneath his steps. To Elias, tending the lighthouse is not a duty, but a devotion. He keeps the flame not out of obligation, but out of love. Yet even for a man at peace with solitude, there are moments when the silence grows heavy. On certain evenings, when the sun bleeds red into the horizon and the lamp is lit, Elias feels a quiet, longing stir within him. He remembers faces long-gone friends whose names are now only echoes in his mind. A family that feels as distant as another lifetime. In those moments, the sound of the sea is not a comfort, but a reminder of what he no longer has. Still, he never lingers in sorrow. He lifts his eyes to the horizon and whispers to the waves, as though they might carry his words across the world. One autumn evening, as clouds gathered heavy and dark above the sea, Elias prepared for the night as he always did. He climbed the tower, his lantern casting a soft circle of light on the stone walls, and reached the top just as the first drops of rain struck the glass. The storm rose quickly, as storms often do. Wind howled, bending the grasses flat against the earth. Waves surged and crashed, their white crests illuminated by flashes of lightning. The air smelled of salt and thunder. Elias lit the lamp with steady hands, shielding the flame until it grew strong and unwavering. Then he stood, soaked by rain, his cloak whipping around him, and watched the beam slice through the darkness far out at sea. Faint against the roar of the storm, a ship struggled. Elias could not see it clearly, but he knew it was there. He imagined sailors gripping ropes with frozen hands, their eyes straining for the glow of his lamp. He whispered into the storm, though no one could hear him. "Hold fast. The light will not fail you." All night the storm raged, shaking the tower and rattling the windows of his cottage below. Yet the lamp never wavered. Its golden road stretched across the waves, guiding, comforting, promising safety. When dawn came and the storm at last relented, Elias heard the faint sound of a ship's horn, in the distance a note of gratitude carried across the water. He smiled, though the sea could not see him. He smiled because the light had done its work. That evening, as the sky cleared and stars emerged, Elias stepped outside the lighthouse to breathe the cool air. The sea was calm once more, as if the storm had been no more than a restless dream. He stood at the cliff's edge, his eyes tracing the horizon, when he noticed something unusual. At the base of the cliff, where rocks met the restless surf, a figure stood. She was cloaked in pale blue, her hair lifted by the wind like strands of silver. Her gaze fixed upon the sea. Elias descended the narrow path toward the rocks, his boots crunching on the gravel, his lantern swaying gently. The woman did not move as he approached. She seemed a part of the night itself, her presence as natural as the stars. "You'll find little comfort on these cliffs after dark," Elias said softly when he was close enough to be heard. His voice was deep, worn by years of salt air. "The winds are harsh, and the sea is not kind." The woman turned her face toward him, and Elias was struck by her eyes. They were pale, almost luminous, reflecting the moonlight as though they carried its glow within them. She smiled faintly. "I know the sea," she replied. Her voice was gentle, like the hush of waves against sand. "I came not for safety, but for the light." Elias frowned slightly, though not unkindly. "The light belongs to sailors," he said. And yet, the woman whispered, stepping closer, "It calls to more than sailors. It calls to all who wander between worlds." Before Elias could ask what she meant, a sudden gust of wind swept across the rocks. When he blinked, she was gone. Only the sea remained, endlessly shifting. Endlessly speaking in its secret tongue, Elias stood for a long while, his lantern held low, his heart steady yet stirred by something he could not name. At last, he turned back toward the lighthouse, its golden beam stretching faithfully across the night. And though the keeper's life returned to its rhythm the next morning, the trimming of the wick, the recording of tides, the quiet solitude of the tower, something had changed. In the back of his mind lingered the vision of a woman cloaked in blue, her eyes filled with moonlight, her words echoing like a whisper carried by the waves. He wrote about her in his logbook, though he did not know what to call her. A woman of the sea, pale as moonlight. A dream? Perhaps? A spirit? He closed the book and placed it back on the shelf. The sea outside continued its endless breathing, and the lamp above continued to shine. But Elias knew, deep down, that his life as keeper of the light was no longer as solitary as it had once been. Something or someone had entered his world, as quiet and certain as the tide. And so the lighthouse burned through the nights, and Elias kept his watch. But in his heart, a question grew. Who was the woman in blue, and why had she come to the cliffs? Days passed, and though Elias tried to fall back into the rhythm of his old life, the memory of the mysterious woman lingered. The sea always whispered, but now its voice seemed different as though it carried her presence within its endless breath. At night, when he climbed the spiral stairs to tend the lamp, he sometimes caught himself pausing at the narrow windows, peering out across the dark waves in hope of glimpsing her again. He told himself she had been a trick of the storm, a dream born of thunder and lightning, but deep within, he knew better. One evening, after the sun had melted into the horizon and twilight spread across the cliffs, Elias lit the lamp and stepped outside to walk along the edge of the bluff. The sky above shimmered with stars, the kind of clear night that made the world seem endless. Below, the sea rolled in gentle silver swells, carrying the moon's reflection like a trail of broken light. Elias leaned against the old stone wall, listening to the surf. That was when he heard a tea voice, soft as a sigh, rising from the rocks below. He froze, straining to hear. It came again. A quiet humming, a tune unlike any he had heard before. Carefully, he descended the winding path, his lantern glowing faintly against the darkness. At the base of the cliff, among the jagged rocks where the waves kissed the shore, she stood once more. Her cloak was the same shade of pale blue, though this time the hood was drawn back, and her hair glimmered silver white in the moonlight. She was singing her song, carried on the wind, weaving itself into the sea's rhythm. It was not in any language Elias knew, yet he understood its meaning in his bones. It spoke of longing, of journeys unending, of a home that was always out of reach. The sound stirred something old within him, some memory buried too deep to name. He did not approach immediately. He stood still, listening, letting her voice move through him like tide through stone. When at last the song faded, he stepped forward, his boots scraping against the gravel. She turned, her luminous eyes settling upon him as though she had known he would come. "You heard me?" she said, her voice softer now, but no less strange. "I did," Elias replied, his own voice steady, though his heart was not. "And I have questions. Questions rarely have answers," she said, a faint smile curving her lips. Still, Elias insisted gently. "I would ask, who are you? Why do you come to these cliffs?" The woman tilted her head, considering. Then she said, "I am one who wanders. The sea knows my name, though men do not. I come because the light calls me." Elias frowned slightly. The light is meant for sailors, for ships adrift, for men lost at sea, not for wanderers on the shore. She stepped closer, and he noticed the air around her seemed different, cooler, charged with something he could not name. "Do you think the light shines only for those who sail?" she asked. "No, Lighthouse Keeper. It shines for all who are lost in whatever world they drift." Her words struck him deeply, as though she had spoken not only to his ears, but to the quietest corners of his soul. He opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could, another sound broke the moment, the low rumble of thunder far out to sea. Clouds had gathered without him noticing, cloaking the horizon in shadow. The woman turned her gaze to the storm and whispered, "It comes again." When Elias looked back, she was gone. The rocks lay empty, the sea restless. The song vanished like mist. The storm came quickly, and Elias had no choice but to hurry back to the tower. He lit the lamp brighter, its beam cutting through sheets of rain as waves rose and crashed against the cliff. All night he worked, tending the flame, ensuring it did not falter. Yet even as he labored, he could not forget her words. "The light shines for all who are lost. By dawn, the storm had passed." The sea lay quiet, though debris from a shipwreck drifted in the distant splintered wood. Broken barrels and a torn sail tangled with seaweed. Elias noted it carefully in his journal. As he did all things, yet his hand trembled when he wrote, "If the sailors had survived, they had not reached the cliffs." He stood for a long time staring at the waves, his thoughts unsettled. The days that followed brought him no peace. He moved through his duties, triming the wick, polishing the glass. Recording the tides, but each task was haunted by the memory of the woman and her song. He found himself wandering the path to the cliffs more often, lingering by the rocks, searching for her silver hair among the sea foam. Sometimes he thought he heard her voice carried on the wind, but when he turned, the shore was empty. One evening, as the sun sank in a blaze of crimson, Elias sat at his desk with a journal open before him. His hand hovered over the page, yet he could not write. His mind kept returning to her words, lost in whatever world they drift. Had he himself been drifting all these years, tending the lamp, keeping the flame alive not only for sailors but for himself as well? He shook his head as if to dispel the thought and forced his pen to move. Yet instead of notes on the sea, he found himself writing of Hertha woman in blue, the song, the eyes like moonlight. His words filled page after page, as though he were compelled by something greater than his own will. That night, unable to sleep, he took his lantern and walked down to the cliffs. The tide was high, the waves restless, but the moon shone bright. He stood on the rocks, breathing the salt air, and whispered into the wind, "If you are real, show yourself. If you are not, let me rest." At first, only silence answered him. Then, slowly, the air shifted. The waves drew back as though the sea itself was listening. And there she was, rising from the foam as though born of the water. Her cloak clung to her like mist, her hair silver and streaming, her eyes glowing softly in the night. "You called?" she said simply. Elias nodded, though his throat felt tight. "I need to understand," he whispered. "What are you? Why are you here?" She stepped closer, her feet barely touching the wet stones. "I am neither dream nor flesh, Lighthouse Keeper. I am of the sea, as the tide is, as the moon is. Long have I wandered between worlds, neither here nor there, bound to no home. The light draws me because it is a promise that even those who are lost may yet find their way." Her words filled him with a strange ache, both sorrow and hope. He wanted to reach out, to touch her, to prove she was real, but something held him back. "And me?" he asked softly. "Why do you speak to me?" "Because you too are lost," she said, her voice as gentle as the tide. Elias felt the truth of it pierce him like a blade. He had thought himself content, alone with the sea and the lamp, yet her words unraveled him. He was lost not at sea, not in storm, but in the silence of his own heart. He had drifted for years, anchored only by duty, not by belonging. Before he could answer, she reached out her hand, hovering it just above his own. The air between them shimmered, alive with something neither earthly nor divine. "When the time comes," she whispered, "the light will show you the way." Then, like mist in sunlight, she faded. Elias remained on the rocks until dawn painted the horizon with gold. His lantern had burned low, and his body ached with weariness, yet his mind was alight. He climbed back to the lighthouse, trimmed the wick, and lit the lamp once more, though now its glow seemed different. No longer just a beacon for sailors, it was a beacon for him as well. In the weeks that followed, Elias continued his work, but something within him had changed. He looked upon the sea not only as a keeper of tides, but as a keeper of secrets. He wrote longer entries in his journal, filled with questions rather than observations. And always, beneath the surface of his words, lingered the memory of the woman in blue, her song like a tide that pulled at his very soul. The days grew shorter as autumn surrendered to winter. The wind sharpened, carrying with it the bite of salt and cold, and the sea grew restless under the gaze of the pale sun. Elias felt the shift in the world around him, but more than that, he felt the shift within himself. The woman in blue haunted him not as a burden, but as a presence, a question he could not shake. His journals filled with her image. His nights stretched longer as he waited by the rocks, and yet she did not return. Weeks passed without sight of her. At times, Elias wondered if she had truly been there at all, or if loneliness had finally woven itself into his mind so deeply that it had conjured her from the mist. Yet every time doubt crept too close, he remembered the touch of her hand hovering near his, the way the air had shimmered with something beyond the world of men. That memory was proof enough to hold him steady, though it left him aching with longing. His duties did not change. Each night he climbed the spiral stair. Each dawn he extinguished the flame. But now the lighthouse felt less like a duty and more like a companion alive, almost listening, as though it too knew of the woman who came with the tide. When storms rolled across the sea, Elias whispered her words to the wind. The light shines for all who are lost. And as he whispered, he began to feel it was not only the sea that was listening. One evening, after tending the lamp, Elias descended to his cottage and sat by the small fire. The storm had passed, and outside the night lay still, heavy with silence. He tried to write, but the ink pooled uselessly on the page. Instead, he stared at the flames, listening to the faint roar of the surf below. Then, without reason, he rose and stepped outside. The air was crisp, filled with the briny tang of the sea. The moon hung low, casting its silver path across the dark waters. Elias followed the path down to the cliffs, his lantern swinging softly. Though he almost did not need it, the night was bright with lunar glow. When he reached the rocks, he paused, heart quickening. For there she was. The woman in blue stood as before, her cloak whispering in the wind, her hair glimmering like spun silver. She was staring out at the horizon, her face calm, though her eyes seemed filled with a sorrow so vast that Elias's chest tightened at the sight. "You've returned?" he said softly, though his voice trembled more than he wished. She turned, and her eyes found his, luminous and deep. "I never left," she whispered. "I am always here, Lighthouse Keeper. You simply cannot always see me." Her words chilled and comforted him at once. He stepped closer, the sea foam curling around his boots. "I've waited," he said quietly. "Waited for your song, for your face. I thought perhaps you had been a dream." Her faint smile flickered, fragile as starlight. "Dreams are truths men cannot bear while waking. Do not dismiss them so easily." They stood in silence for a while, the waves speaking their endless tongue around them. Elias longed to ask her 1,000 questions about the sea, about her. Nature, about why she had chosen to reveal herself to him, but instead, he simply said, "Tell me your name." She looked away, her gaze drifting to the horizon where the moon touched the waves. When she spoke, her voice was barely more than a breath. "Names are anchors. I have none, for I am not meant to stay." Elias felt a sharp pang of sorrow, though he did not know why. "Then what should I call you?" Her eyes returned to him, shimmering with something unspoken. "Call me what your heart knows me to be." He studied her in the moonlight, her pale cloak, her silver hair, her eyes like liquid light. A word rose unbidden in his chest, soft and certain. "Celine." For a moment, she closed her eyes, as though the name itself were both a gift and a wound. Then she whispered, "So be it, Celine." The sound of it lingered in the air like music. Elias felt as though the world itself had shifted. When he spoke it, as though something had been sealed between them. "Why me?" he asked after a long pause. "Why come to me, and not to the villagers below, or to the sailors at sea?" "Because you keep the light," she answered simply. "And because you, too, are adrift. The sea calls to those who are lost. I heard it in you the first night I came." Her words pierced him, yet he could not deny them. For years he had lived in solitude, convincing himself he was content. But in truth, he had been drifting all along, anchored only by duty and routine. Celine's presence had pulled this truth to the surface. As unavoidable as the tide, before he could respond, she lifted her hand and pointed toward the horizon. Elias followed her gaze and saw a ship far out at sea, its lanterns flickering like stars against the dark. The waters around it grew rough, waves building with sudden force. He knew at once the danger it was heading straight for the rocks. Without another word, Elias turned and ran up the path to the lighthouse, his breath coming in sharp bursts. He climbed the spiral stair 2 at a time, his lantern swinging wildly, and burst into the chamber of the lamp. The flame burned steady, but he trimmed the wick higher, coaxing it to blaze brighter. The golden beam shot across the sea, piercing. The storm-dark waters, guiding, warning, pleading with the ship to steer away. Elias stood at the glass, his heart hammering, his hands pressed against the cold pane. Blow! The waves crashed mercilessly against the cliff. The ship veered, its lantern shifting, and for a terrible moment, he feared it was too late. But then, slowly, painfully, it turned, skirting the edge of the rocks, its sails straining in the wind. With each breath, Elias willed it to survive. At last, the vessel slipped into calmer waters, its lantern steady once more. A longhorn blew across the night, a sound of gratitude, distant but clear. Elias exhaled, his body trembling with relief. He closed his eyes, whispering a quiet prayer of thanks, not only to the lamp, but to the woman who had seen the danger before he had. When he descended the tower and returned to the cliffs, Celine was gone. Only the sea remained, vast and endless, its voice mingling with the wind. Yet Elias knew she had been there, guiding him as surely as he guided the sailors. That night, when he finally slept, his dreams were filled with water and light. He saw Celine walking upon the waves, her cloak trailing like foam, her hand outstretched toward him. He reached for her, but each time she faded like mist. Leaving him alone with the sea dot, winter settled harsh upon the coast. Snow gathered along the cliffs, and the sea turned black and restless. Elias kept the lamp burning through blizzards. Nights when the winds screamed against the tower and frost gathered thick upon the glass. The villagers below rarely saw him, though they often spoke of him with gratitude. More than once, a fisherman or trader returned alive from the sea and swore it was the light that had saved them. Through it all, Elias carried the memory of Celine. She came to him sometimes, though not often appearing on the rocks in the quiet after a storm, or singing her song when the moon was high. Each time, their words drew them closer, though she always carried with her a sadness Elias could not touch. He yearned to ask what kept her bound to the sea, why she could not stay, but something in her eyes silenced him. He feared that if he pressed too hard, she might vanish altogether. Still, with each meeting, the bond between them deepened. He no longer thought of her as dream or spirit, but as something truer, more enduring like the tide itself, always returning, even if only for a moment. He began to believe that just as the lighthouse stood to guide sailors, Celine had come to guide him, and yet, as the year turned and the sea grew more violent, Elias felt an unease growing within him. For though the light shone strong, though he tended it with every fiber of his being, could not shake the sense that a greater storm was coming, one not of wind and wave, but of fate itself. The sea grew restless as winter deepened. Days were short, nights long, and storms seemed to gather without warning, rolling in from the horizon with thunder like the beating of 1,000 drums. Elias tended the lamp with more care than ever, his hands steady though his heart knew unease. He had kept the light for many years, weathered countless storms, yet now something felt different. The air itself seemed charged, as if waiting, as if holding its breath. Celine came to him less often. Weeks would pass without her song or her pale figure on the rocks, and Elias felt the absence like a hollow in his chest. Yet when she did appear, the world seemed to shift around her, brighter, sharper, filled with a strange stillness. She never explained where she went in the times between, only smiled with that same sorrow in her eyes, as though she carried secrets too heavy to share. One night, after a blizzard had swept the coast, Elias descended the path to the cliffs. Snow crunched under his boots, the air sharp with frost, and the moonlight turned the world silver. He found her standing at the water's edge, her cloak trailing across the snow like a spill of light. "You should not walk here in this cold," Elias said. Though his breath caught at the sight of her, Celine looked at him, her eyes shimmering. "The cold does not touch me, but it touches you." "Why come?" "Because I thought you would be here," he answered simply. Her lips curved faintly, and she lifted her gaze to the sea. The water churned, even in calm weather, as if some hidden force stirred beneath the waves. "The sea is changing," she said softly. "A storm greater than any you have known is coming." Elias frowned. "I have faced many storms. This one is not like the others," she whispered. "This one carries more than wind and rain. It carries choice." Her words unsettled him, though he did not fully understand them. He stepped closer, the snow crunching softly, and asked, "Choice of what?" But she did not answer. Instead, she turned to him and reached out her hand. For the first time, her fingers brushed his, cool and light as mist. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a shiver through him, not of cold, but of something deeper, as though the sea itself had moved through his veins. "Keep the light," she said firmly, her voice suddenly fierce. "No matter what comes, keep it burning. Promise me." Elias held her gaze, steady and sure. "I promise." Her hand withdrew, her figure already fading into the mist. "Then perhaps," she whispered, "you will not be lost." And she was gone. The next morning dawned bright and still, the snow glittering across the cliffs. But Elias could not shake her warning. He moved through his duties with care, polishing the lamp until it shone, trimming the wick until it was perfect. His journals filled with notes of cloud formations, wind patterns. The pull of the tide jet beneath the careful writing lay a quiet fear. The storm came 3 nights later. It rose without warning, the sea darkening beneath a sky split by lightning. Waves surged higher than Elias had ever seen, crashing against the cliff with a force that shook the very tower. The wind howled like a beast, tearing at shutters and rattling doors. The lighthouse groaned under its weight, yet stood firm, its stone body defiant against the rage of the elements. Elias climbed the spiral stair, his lantern swaying wildly, and reached the chamber of the lamp. Rain lashed against the glass, the world outside a blur of water and fury. He lit the flame with steady hands, shielding it until it grew, until the great beam cut through the storm like a sword of fire. The sea roared, waves rising and breaking against the rocks below. In the distance, faint against the chaos, Elias saw a ship. Its sails were torn, its mast cracked, its lanterns flickering desperately. It was caught in the storm's grip, dragged toward the cliffs, its crew fighting against the inevitable. Elias pressed his hands against the glass, whispering, "Hold fast. See the light? Follow it." The ship lurched, its bow rising and falling with the waves. Each crash brought it closer to destruction. Elias fed the lamp brighter, coaxing every ounce of flame he could until the tower itself seemed to blaze. The golden beam stretched across the sea, a road through chaos, a promise of survival. Yet as he watched, Elias felt the tower tremble. Stones groaned, the glass shuddered, and the wind screamed like a living thing. He knew the storm was stronger than anything he had faced. For the first time, he feared the lighthouse itself might fall. Then he heard a voice beneath the storm. Not thunder, not wind, but song. Selena's song. It rose from the waves, weaving through the tempest, carrying words he could not understand but felt deep within. Her voice wrapped around the storm, not silencing it, but guiding it, bending its fury just enough to open a path. The ship turned, its lantern steadying, its bow cutting through the waves. Slowly, painfully, it followed the beam, inch by inch, until at last it slipped past the rocks and vanished into calmer waters. Elias exhaled, his body trembling. The lamp still burned, but his strength was nearly gone. He sank to his knees in the chamber, listening to the storm rage on. And then, through the shattered glass of the window, he saw her. Selene, standing upon the waves themselves, her cloak streaming, her hair a halo of silver. She raised her hand, her song rising higher, and the storm seemed to bend around her. She looked at him, her eyes meeting his across the fury of the sea. Elias pressed his hand to the glass, his heart breaking with awe and sorrow. For in that moment, he understood. Selene was not merely of the sea, she was bound to it, a spirit of tide and storm, forever wandering. Forever apart from the world of men, her song reached its peak, and the storm began to ease. The waves lowered, the wind fell to a weary moan, and the lightning flickered and died. Selene's figure shimmered in the fading tempest, her eyes locked on his. And then, slowly, she dissolved into mist, her voice fading with her. The sea grew quiet. The lighthouse stood, battered but unbroken, its flames still burning. Elias remained kneeling, his hand pressed to the glass. Tears he had not felt in years slipping down his weathered cheeks. He whispered her name, Selene. The night answered only with silence, but though she was gone, her words lingered in his heart. Keep the light. No matter what comes, keep it burning. And so he rose, weary but steadfast, and tended the flame once more. The days after the storm passed in strange stillness. The sea, once a raging beast, lay calm and gray beneath the winter sky. Snow lingered on the cliffs, the air sharp with salt and frost. The lighthouse bore scars of the tempest-cracked panes. Loosened stones, iron fixtures bent from the strain. Yet the tower still stood, proud and unyielding, its flame unbroken. Elias walked its spiral stairs with slow steps, his body weary from long nights without sleep. He polished the lamp, trimmed the wick, wrote careful notes in his journal, all as he had done for years. Yet everything felt changed. The rhythm of his work, once a comfort, now carried a weight. He thought often of Celine, her song that cut through the storm, her figure standing upon the waves, her eyes meeting his before dissolving into mist. Sometimes he wondered if he had imagined it, some vision born of exhaustion and fear. But deep in his heart, he knew she had been real. Too real. The memory of her voice lingered like a melody that refused to fade, echoing in his dreams, tugging at him with every sound of the sea. One morning, as pale sunlight crept across the stones, Elias stepped out onto the narrow balcony high on the tower. The ocean stretched before him, endless and cold, but peaceful at last. The village below bustled back to life, fishermen repairing nets, children chasing one another in the snow, smoke rising from chimneys as families mended roofs torn by the storm. They looked up to the lighthouse with gratitude. Word had spread quickly of the ship saved by the lamp's steady flame, how the keeper had held the light when all seemed lost. Villagers climbed the path with baskets of bread, jars of preserves, fish smoked and salted, leaving them at his door. Some knocked, hoping to see him, to give thanks with words. Elias rarely answered. He accepted the gifts quietly, setting them inside, but spoke little. He was not ungrateful. He was simply elsewhere. His mind was always turned toward the sea. Nights grew heavier with silence. He would sit in the lantern room, the great lamp casting its golden beam across the dark waters, and listen. Each wave crashing against the rocks below seemed to carry an echo of her song. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, he swore he could almost hear her voice rising faintly through the mist. One night, unable to bear the pull, he left the tower and descended the snowy path. The moon hung low, a silver crescent, and the tide lapped softly at the shore. Elias walked the frozen beach, his lantern casting a pale glow, his breath rising in plumes. He called her name once, softly, as though afraid to break the stillness. The sea answered only with silence. Yet as he turned to leave, he noticed something half buried in the sand. He knelt, brushing away the frost, and found a shell-smooth, iridescent, glowing faintly even in the dark. He lifted it, feeling warmth against his palm, impossible in the winter cold. The moment he held it to his ear, the faint sound of her song drifted through him. Soft as memory, Elias closed his eyes, clutching the shell to his chest. "You're still here?" he whispered. From that night forward, the shell became his treasure. He kept it on his bedside table, carried it in his pocket during long watches, held it against his heart when the loneliness grew sharp. Through it, he felt her presence. It did not ease the ache entirely, but it gave him a reminder that she had not vanished completely. The villagers noticed his solitude deepening. Some worried, others gossiped quietly, but none disturbed him. They spoke of him as the man who lived more with the sea than with people, the keeper who belonged to the lighthouse more than the village. And in truth, Elias felt the same. The world of hearth and market, of laughter and chatter, seemed distant to him now. His world was flame and sea, light and shadow, and the faint echo of a song that tied him to something vast and eternal. Seasons shifted. Snow melted, wildflowers sprang across the cliffs. The sea shifted from steel gray to deep blue. Ships came and went, guided by his light, each one a story passing briefly through his gaze. He kept the lamp burning night after night, never faltering, never failing. Yet he always returned to the shell, listening to its faint song. waiting for a sign. That sign came one midsummer night. The air was warm, the sea calm, and the moon rose full and luminous. Elias sat in the lantern room, the great beams sweeping the horizon, when a sudden hush fell. The wind stilled, the waves smoothed, and the silence grew so deep it seemed the world itself held its breath. And then, faint at first, came her voice. Not from the shell, not from memory, but from the sea itself. Selena's song rose clear and strong, carrying across the water, filling the chamber like a tide of sound. Elias stumbled to his feet, his heart pounding, and rushed down the spiral stairs. He reached the cliffs, the moonlight flooding the rocks in silver. And there she was. Selene, standing at the water's edge, her cloak shimmering like woven starlight, her hair flowing around her shoulders. She looked exactly as she had that night in the storm, yet softer, brighter. Her sorrow touched with something new, something like hope. Elias froze, breathless. Selene. Her eyes met his, and her smile trembled. "You kept the light," I promised, he said, his voice raw. "I kept it." She stepped closer, though her feet barely seemed to touch the ground. "The sea has allowed me to come once more. Not for long, but long enough." He moved toward her, each step heavy with longing. "I thought you were gone forever. I am bound to the waters," she whispered. "I cannot remain. But I could not leave without one more night, one more chance to see you." "Two, thank you." He reached out, though he did not expect to touch her. To his astonishment, her hand met his. It was cool, yet solid, her fingers curling around his. For a moment, the world ceased. There was no sea, no sky, no time, only the two of them, bound by something deeper than distance. Tears burned Elias's eyes. "Stay." Selene shook her head gently. "If I stay, I will fade. My place is in the tides. Yours is here, with the light. That is how it must be." His throat ached, but he nodded, understanding even as it tore at him. She smiled, luminous in the moonlight. "But know this, you are not alone. As long as the sea moves, as long as the waves touch the shore, I will be near. You will hear me in the tides, in the wind, in the silence between storms. And one day, when your light is no longer needed, when your journey is complete, you will find me again." Elias clutched her hand. Memorizing the feel of it, the look of her eyes, the curve of her smile. "Then I will keep the light," he vowed. "For as long as I live, I will keep it burning." Her gaze shimmered with tears that did not fall. She leaned closer, pressing her forehead gently to his. Her voice, soft as the sea's sigh. "Then you will never be lost." The tide rose suddenly, swirling around them. Selene's form began to fade, her cloak dissolving into mist, her fingers slipping from his. Elias reached for her, but only caught water, cool and empty. She was gone, the waves folding over the place she had stood, leaving only moonlight rippling across the surface. Elias sank to his knees on the cliff, his chest heavy with loss, yet burning with a strange peace. She was gone, but not gone. Her words lingered like the echo of her song woven into the air. The sea. His very bones dot, he rose at last, weary but resolute, and returned to the tower. He climbed the stairs, lit the lamp anew, and watched its golden beams stretch across the endless dark. And for the first time since the storm, Elias smiled. Years passed like waves against the shore, steady and unstoppable. The village below, the cliffs grew, new cottages rising where old ones had crumbled, children becoming parents, parents becoming memories. Ships came and went, trade routes shifting, sails filling the horizon with color and sound. Yet the lighthouse stood unchanged, its flame burning night after night, its keeper faithful as ever. Elias grew older. His hair turned silver, his back bent with time. And his hands, once strong, trembled at times as he polished the lamp or wrote in his journal. Yet his eyes never lost their fire, never lost the depth of the sea that had lived in him since the night Selene first appeared. He walked slower, rested more often, but still climbed the spiral stair each dusk. Still lit the flame with careful hands, still whispered to the sea as though speaking to her. The villagers revered him. To some, he was a figure of myth, a man who seemed half spirit himself, belonging more to the lighthouse than to the land. Children whispered tales of the keeper who never left the cliffs, who spoke to the sea and was answered in kind. Sailors swore they saw him standing at the top of the tower on stormy nights, his lantern glowing brighter than any flame, his figure outlined by lightning as though the storm itself bowed to him. They left offerings at his door: bread, wine, flowers, shells as though honoring a guardian. Elias accepted them quietly, grateful but distant. His heart belonged to another world. He lived between light and tide, between land and sea, between time and memory. And always, he carried Selene's presence with him. The shell she had left never lost its glow, its song always waiting when he held it close. Some nights, when the wind hushed and the sea calmed, he heard her voice carried through the waves, soft and steady, as though reminding him he was not alone. In his final years, Elias spent more time on the balcony of the lantern room. He would sit in a worn wooden chair, a blanket over his knees, and watch the horizon for hours. The flame beside him swept across the water in its eternal rhythm, and he would whisper softly, "The light is burning, Selene. It still burns. Storms still came. Though they seemed to pass differently now, less fury, more rhythm, as though the sea remembered its promise. Ships still appeared in the distance, but Elias no longer rushed to the glass, no longer worried if they would see. He knew they always would. The light had become something greater than a flame. It was a vow, a bond, a bridge between worlds. One autumn evening, the air cool and fragrant with sea spray, Elias felt a weariness deeper than any storm had given him. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step a labor, and reached the lantern room as the sun sank below the horizon. He lit the lamp with trembling hands, watched the beams stretch across the twilight, and sank into his chair. His breath came easier in the light's glow, his heart steady. His mind calmed. The sea below shimmered silver in the moonlight. The waves whispered against the rocks, a song older than memory. And then, faint at first, he heard her. Selene's voice, clear, strong, steady. It filled the chamber, wrapped around him, lifted him. He closed his eyes, tears on his weathered cheeks, and whispered, "I hear you." The light blazed brighter than ever, golden fire stretching farther than it ever had, as though the flame itself rose to answer her. Elias felt warmth flood his body, not from the fire, but from within, as though the sea and sky had poured themselves into him. His breath slowed, his heart stilled, and he knew, without fear, that the time had come. He opened his eyes one last time, and there she was, Selene, standing in the lantern room, radiant in silver light, her eyes filled with love and sorrow and joy all at once. She reached out her hand, and this time there was no distance, no mist, no fading. Her touch was warm, real, eternal. "You kept the light," she whispered. "I promised," Elias said, his voice steady, his soul at peace. She smiled, luminous as the moon. "Then it is time to rest." Elias rose, his body no longer frail, no longer heavy. He stepped into her embrace, and the room filled with light brighter than flame, brighter than moon, brighter than all the storms of his life. The villagers awoke the next morning to find the lighthouse still burning, its flame steady and strong, though the keeper was nowhere to be found. His chair sat empty, his journal open on the desk, the final entry written in a firm hand. The light burns. It always will, and so the years passed. The lighthouse became legend, its keeper a story whispered by sailors, told by parents to their children. Some said he had walked into the sea and been taken by the waves. Others swore they saw him on stormy nights, a tall figure in the glow of the lamp, standing beside a woman cloaked in silver. But all who sailed those waters agreed on one thing: the light never faltered. Through storm and fog, through years and centuries, the flame of the old lighthouse always burned, guiding ships to safety. And those who listened closely on calm nights swore they could hear a song in the waves' two voices, twined together, carrying across the endless dark. And so Elias, the lighthouse keeper, and Celine, the spirit of the sea, kept their eternal watch. One of stone and flame, the other of tide and song, bound forever beneath the moon where light and water meet.
you.